Words of Radiance is the second book in the Stormlight Archive by Brandon Sanderson. It takes place just a few days after the end of the first book, still following Shallan, Kaladin, and Dalinar. Words of Radiance is the highest-rated book on Goodreads, and for good reason. Where The Way of Kings was a deep character drama about Dalinar finding his identity and Kaladin's responsibility as a leader and protector, the second book is where the stakes are raised to incorporate the entire Cosmere, where an ancient evil threatens to take control and a violent storm awaits to destroy whatever is left. Words of Radiance is a story about the responsibility of leadership, the difference between killing and saving, and the value of human life. Each plot and character must answer the question of whether killing to save is really justice, and if revenge is actually worth it in the end. This video contains no spoilers for the later books. Words of Radiance begins with a different perspective on the night King Gavilar died. Before Gavilar is killed, Jasnah overhears a conversation between a herald named Nale and a herald who is suspected to be Kalak. Nale shows up like 7 times in this book, so I'll explain more about him when it's necessary. It's hinted that all 9 heralds were at the treaty signing where Gavilar was killed. Only Talanel was excluded since he was still stuck in damnation. Szeth carries the herald Jezrien's blade, and Kalak and Nale discuss that they shouldn't have let him keep it. We don't know how Szeth got Jezrien's blade in the first place, but we do know that this specific blade grants the user Windrunner powers, so that's why Szeth can change gravity and use adhesion. The story begins with Shallan and Jasnah sailing towards the Shattered Plains. They both want to learn more about the Parshendi, since they are now confirmed to be linked to the Voidbringers. Jasnah also believes that the secrets to the ancient city of the Knights Radiant, Uruthiru, are somehow hidden among these plains. Jasnah informs Shallan that she is to be betrothed to Adolin Kholin. Adolin has had trouble keeping a woman, and since Shallan is a Surgebinder and the next coming of the Knights Radiant, she is one of the most powerful people in the world. Shallan also begins to actually see the Spren following her. In the previous book, Pattern showed himself by appearing in her drawings, but now Pattern is in the physical world. He's called a cryptic, tied to lightweaving and soulcasting. Lightweaving is the ability to make illusions, like changing your face or voice, and soulcasting is changing any object into another, which is how Shallan was able to soulcast the goblet into blood in the first book. Similarly to Syl, Pattern doesn't remember everything that brought him to Shallan. He is fascinated by lies and conversations such as sarcasm, metaphors, and flattery. We know that sentient Spren are usually tied to some sort of real-world attribute like honor or protecting, so Pattern appears to be linked to truth and lies. Shallan gets in the water to see a Santhid, a giant squid-type creature, and this is important because Santhids have living Spren inside them, just like Chasmveens and Rashadium horses, which is why these creatures are able to grow so large. They're also much smarter than other animals. The Parshendi have been said to use the Chasmveens to navigate the Shattered Plains, and Dalinar's Rashadium horse won't eat food unless it feels it did its duty. And Shallan makes quite the impression on the Santhid since it shows up just a few chapters later. Shallan and Jasnah's ship is attacked by the Ghostbloods, and Shallan wakes up in the middle of the night to see Jasnah get stabbed through the heart and her body thumped to the ground. Shallan uses light weaving to hide from the attackers and then jumps into Shadesmar with Pattern to soulcast the bottom of the ship to create chaos in hopes that some of the sailors can survive. To soulcast, Shallan has to convince the spirit of the ship that this is the only way to save the people on this ship. Reluctantly, the ship's spirit obeys and the entire boat is turned into water. Shallan wakes up on a shore with Pattern. It appears that the Santhid saved her, while everyone else most likely drowned. Somehow, one of the trunks full of Jasnah's research also washes ashore, and Shallan did notice Jasnah's body missing from the ground when she was running through the ship. Shallan finds a group of slavers, the same group that brought Kaladin to the Shattered Plains, and convinces them to transport her to the Shattered Plains. Part of Shallan's story in Words of Radiance is about her illusion of power and authority. She is still timid and reserved at the beginning of this book, but through Jasnah and Pattern's influence, Shallan begins to see the power that she possesses with her words. This eventually leads her to take advantage of people and forget who she is, but that's for later. Kaladin and his men are now bodyguards to the Kholin family. Teft begins training other bridgemen and hopes to rebuild Dalinar's personal guard and army. Kaladin is pleased with his new position. He still has a deep hatred for Light Eyes, but he respects Dalinar, concluding that he might be the exception to the entitled stereotype. Bridge 4 gets tattoos and new uniforms, and the group appears to be closer than ever. Bridge 4 is under a lot of pressure because Dalinar just released a proclamation that all High Princes must run plateau assaults on a cycle, and that gem hearts will be given to the king, who will portion out the winnings. This completely undercuts Sadeas and many of the other High Princes who use the war to profit from halving gem hearts. Dalinar also sees glyphs written on the wall after a high storm, warning him of something called the Everstorm. 62 days, death follows, it says. Kaladin, Sigzil, Lopen, and Rock want to test the capacity of Kaladin's abilities, so they run tests to see how long Kaladin can bind a rock to a wall and if he can bind himself to the wall. Kaladin struggles with his abilities at first, but Syl assures him that just like training with the spear, this will take time. The training is interrupted when a soldier tells him that a hero has arrived at the Shattered Plains. Kaladin walks to Dalinar's camp to see him shaking hands with Amaram, the same man who killed Kaladin's squad and made him a slave. The second book is where the interludes become really important. Eshonai and Venli are Parshendi. We saw Eshonai a few times in The Way of Kings when Kaladin stabbed her leg. Eshonai is the Parshendi's only shardbearer, and although she fights the most, she doesn't hate the Alethi or blame them for their attacks. Venli, her sister, on the other hand, has an intense desire for power and wants to see the Alethi destroyed. Venli discovered something that she believes to be something called a storm spren. She wants to bond the spren to create a storm while the Alethi army is on the plateau, in essence, wiping them out where they can't escape. But the Parshendi culture is deeply afraid of something they refer to as the return of their gods. We know from Shallan's study that the Parshendi gods are the Voidbringers. We also learn that this is why the Parshendi killed Gavilar 6 years ago. It's hinted in the prologue that Gavilar and Amram were secretly trying to refound the Voidbringers. The Parshendi are worried that if Stormspren are indeed real, then it could be the return of their ancient gods. However, Venli convinces them that because Kaladin exists, a Knight Radiant, their gods have officially returned, and the risk is worth it. The Parshendi have different forms that their bodies can change into for different tasks, such as Dol form, which is what the Parshmen are, and War form, which is what the Parshendi are most known for. But Venli says that this Stormspren can create a new form, something even stronger than War form, and that it can use it to wipe out the Alethi. Eshonai says that Venli's mind is too important, so she will bond the Stormspren first. Yim is an old man with surge-binding powers of illumination and progression. Progression allows the user to heal injuries on other people and accelerate plant growth and other things. Yim is then killed by the Herald Nale. Risen is back trading for her Baps. We don't really know what Risen's chapters mean yet, but it's suspected that she will become a surge-binder in the later books. Shallan continues her trek from the shallow crypts to the shattered plains. She has the slavers transport her the entire way until they run into deserters from the Alethi war camp. Shallan uses her illusion of authority to manipulate the deserters to fight a group of bandits that's been tracking them. She promises them amnesty for their desertion. Shallan meets a woman named Tin, who works for the Ghostbloods, the same group that's been trying to kill her family and supposedly killed Yasna. Tin believes that Shallan is a con artist, pretending to be a noblewoman to assassinate the king or Dalinar. Shallan meets Kaladin on the outskirts of the Shattered Plains. She pretends to be a Horn-Eater and acts offended by Kaladin's insults. She yells and makes a fool of herself, trying to get Kaladin to give her his boots. Kaladin finally agrees, only to shut her up. The Kholin family decide that they need to take more power for themselves after Sadeas' betrayal in the last book, so Dalinar encourages Adolin to start dueling again. He forbid Adolin to duel for the last few years because the codes mention something about fighting for gain during time of war. But Dalinar is done letting lying men push him around, so Adolin begins challenging other shardbearers in the camps to dueling matches. However, he's having trouble finding willing participants because Sadeas is paying other shardbearers to decline Adolin's invitations. And for good reason. Adolin is perhaps the most skilled swordsman on the Shattered Plains, maybe even all of Roshar. He grew up with a warlord for a father and a ruthless king as an uncle, so it makes sense that Adolin has been wanting this for a long time. Adolin beats his first opponent in a matter of moments, to entice others to challenge him, but it doesn't work. He gets a man named Elit to fight him, but Elit wants a week to train. Renarin suddenly doesn't wear glasses anymore and has cryptic comments about an upcoming storm. Kaladin and Moash discuss their shared hatred for the Light Eyes in camp. Moash says that he will get his revenge eventually. The two of them and some other bridgemen watch Adolin and Renarin train with shardblades. Adolin can't stand Kaladin because he yelled at him on the tower in the first book, and Kaladin doesn't like Adolin because he feels Adolin is entitled and arrogant. Kaladin meets a man named Zahel. Zahel speaks about colors and the strange ways of this world. Zahel is secretly a man called Vasher, who is a main character in the book Warbreaker, but I'll talk about him more in a later video. Later, Kaladin and Zahel train with blunted shardblades. Zahel bests Kaladin, but Kaladin notes that he did enough for the target to get away, so he wins. Adolin interrupts by asking what if there were two shardbearers, and calls him Bridge Boy, which makes Kaladin's blood boil, and he lashes out and attacks Adolin. Adolin is wearing full plate, so it's an easy win, but the short fight solidifies Kaladin and Adolin's hatred for each other. During the fight, Kaladin notices that his stormlight dissipates almost immediately. He asks Syl what happened, and she responds by asking, "Who were you protecting?" Kaladin's powers get stronger when he's protecting someone. His sworn oath is to protect those who cannot protect himself. So when he's fighting out of petty hatred, his powers don't work. The Kholin gang and Kaladin have a meeting where they discuss Adolin's duels, assassins, and Amaram. Dalinar is trying to get Amaram to leave Sadeas' princedom and join his. Afterwards, Kaladin speaks with Dalinar about Amaram, telling him the truth about Amaram's murder and theft. Dalinar promises to look into the incident, but warns Kaladin about his insubordination. Dalinar's intensity and power often clash with Kaladin's brooding stubbornness. The two characters are by far the strongest-willed in the series, but they share a common value in protecting human life, and they both know that the other values the same. So even if they argue, they still trust one another immensely. There's an assassination attempt on Elhokar's life again. Someone cut the railing on the balcony he likes to lean on. It appears to be Elhokar's classic paranoia, but Kaladin notices that the railing was cut with a shard blade, meaning it was a real assassination attempt, albeit a lousy one. Later, Kaladin learns how to ride a Rashadium horse, Dreamstorm, and ends up in the dirt again. The book gives us a chapter from Sadeas' perspective, as he plots maniacally with his wife about how to undermine the Kholins. He plans to kill Dalinar and the rest of the Kholins eventually. Sadeas also lifts the ban on dueling with Adolin. Previously, Sadeas was trying to undermine Dalinar by bribing other shardbearers not to challenge Adolin. But Sadeas thinks he can play with Adolin. He says he can be goaded, pushed around, brought to anger. He has passion like his father, but he controls it less securely. So he starts encouraging others, because he wants to take advantage of Adolin's petulance. Which is funny, because Adolin's hot-headedness is what causes him to kill Sadeas at the end of this book. So, in essence, it's Sadeas' plotting and conniving that are his downfall. Kaladin is dozing off while on duty, and has a vision of the Stormfather warning him about his upcoming betrayal. The Stormfather says that Kaladin's betrayal will kill Syl, and that it's already begun. Syl wakes him and tells him that the one who hates is here. Kaladin warns Dalinar, and they join Adolin to protect the king. Szeth appears in the hallway, and a battle ensues. Szeth lashes Adolin to the ceiling, changing his gravitational pull. Szeth also cuts Kaladin's arm, causing the limb to die. Then he attacks Dalinar, and Dalinar catches the shard blade with his hands. He uses a move called a last clap, essentially catching the sides of the blade without touching the edge. It's usually a last resort option, and since attackers aren't swinging shard blades particularly fast, it's not all that unrealistic. Kaladin tackles Szeth out a window, and the two fall roughly 50 feet to the ground, both of them using Stormlight to heal themselves. Szeth sees Kaladin heal his dead arm and concludes that the Knights Radiant must have returned. We don't know Szeth's full story yet, but he was likely banished from Shinovar and sworn to an Oathstone because he believed the Knights Radiant were returning. So, understandably, he goes completely mad when he sees Kaladin's Surgebind. "They told me I was a liar," he says. "They told me I was wrong. Szeth, son Vallano, truthless. They named me truthless," he yells. Adolin is suspicious of Kaladin's healed arm, but dismisses it for paranoia. Shallan and the Ghostblood woman Tin continue their trek across the Shattered Plains. Tin is reading a span read from the other Ghostblood members, and they confirm that Yasna is dead. This was Tin's current mission. The span read also says that Yasna had a ward, a young woman with red hair named Shallan Devar. Tin attacks Shallan, slamming her head against a table. Shallan creates an illusion, then summons a shard blade and stabs Tin, killing her instantly. Shallan having a shard blade seemingly comes out of nowhere. It's not mentioned once in the Way of Kings, and Shallan could have used the blade several times earlier in the book while her crew was fighting bandits. Shallan, however, doesn't seem that surprised by it. We know from the end of this book that Shallan has been bonded to Pattern since she was a child, and this is the first instance we've seen of a shard blade forming from a bonded spren. Now the nature of a shard blade begins to unveil itself. When the Knights Radiant abandoned mankind, they left their shard blades, killing the spren they were bonded to. This explains all the bizarre properties of shard blades, like how they disappear when not wielded, and how they don't cut through human flesh but instead take its soul. The 10 heartbeats to summon a shard blade is apparently the amount of time to momentarily revive the spren in the blade. The new Knights Radiant, like Shallan and Kaladin, have bonded a spren that is alive, so their shard blades are slightly different. For instance, they don't require 10 heartbeats to be summoned because they're not being revived. Anyway, Shallan kills Tin, but takes Tin's place in the communication with the Ghostbloods. They're investigating Urithiru, and Shallan wants to know what they know, so she agrees to meet them. Shallan's flashbacks mostly serve to show Shallan's terrible and dark upbringing. Her father's mental instability and rabid anger make his actions unpredictable. Instead of explaining every flashback, I'll split it into 3 sections, the first 2 describing the characters and plot, and the last describing Shallan's arc in this book. The main characters in these flashbacks are as follows. Lyn Devar, Shallan's father, who is accused by his family and the town of killing his wife and her secret lover. Helloran, who is Shallan's oldest brother, who left the family due to their father's actions. Helloran was a member of the Skybreakers, which is why he was trying to kill Amaram at the beginning of the Way of Kings. He wasn't a Surgebinder, but an apprentice to Nale the Herald. Again, I'll explain more about Nale a little bit later when it's more necessary. Balat is the second oldest brother. He has a lot of anger issues and releases this anger by torturing small animals. Jushu and Wickham are twins. Jushu has an addictive personality and is constantly drunk and or gambling away his money. Wickham has some depression issues and talks about suicide often. In the first scene, Shallan mentions that she is a monster. Her father cradles her, telling her to forget everything that's happened. It says it was the man who bled. Mother lay face down, so Shallan couldn't see the eyes. The horrible eyes. It's also shown that Helloran, Shallan's older brother, has a shard blade. There's a scene where the bastard of a high prince comes to the Devar household to investigate the murder of Shallan's mother. This scene is meant for world building. Some of the Veden high princes because Taravangian uses them to ascend to the throne in Yaakoved. Shallan also meets Wit when she was a child. Wit somehow knows that Shallan is a Radiant because he asks her about symbol-headed creatures and patterns that are unexplained. Wit tells her that she will need to understand the nature of lies and see truth before she can expand upon it. Eshonai meets Adolin on the plateaus and tells him she wants to talk to Dalinar. Eshonai hopes to settle for peace, but before she can meet with him, she tries to use a red spren to transform into storm form. During a high storm, Eshonai sees the Stormfather, who asks her, "Do you really want to do this?" Eshonai is scared and doesn't want to, but the spren breaks free and shoots into her chest. Using the new form, she returns home in the storm. Her eyes glow red, and Venli and the rest of her people seem to admire her. Eshonai glories in the praise, but a voice inside her screams in horror. Kaladin approaches Zahel in the middle of the night to learn more about how to defend against the Shardblade. Zahel says no, to come back at a decent hour. There's also an interlude with the Herald Talanel. Last time we saw Talanel, he was breaking into a building in Alethkar at the end of Way of Kings, saying he failed and that the Voidbringers are coming. Talanel is quickly disregarded as a madman, but he does have a Shardblade, and Talanel has dark eyes, which seems odd to the rest of the characters, since Shardblades always turn the wielder's eyes light. This scene is important for many reasons, but specifically because Dalinar gets the Shardblade that Talanel had. But later, Borden, the man who brought Talanel to the Shattered Plains, tells Amaram about a cache of Shardblades. Then Amaram lies and covers it up, which is how Dalinar is able to uncover that Kaladin is telling the truth about Amaram. I'll cover this in more detail when we get to that scene. Also, this could be a long shot, but I like to point out real-world references when I notice them. Sanderson has said he is a huge fan of the Christopher Nolan movies, specifically The Prestige. In The Prestige, Borden is the side character that kind of gets lost in the background, but his existence is extremely important in exposing Christian Bale's character. Borden in this book isn't wearing a secret disguise, but he is being used to expose Amaram. So Sanderson could have used that name here as a nod to those movies, or it's just a coincidence. Shallan arrives at the Shattered Plains and meets Dalinar and Navani. She's the one that has to tell them that Jasnah is supposedly dead. This could be some sly maneuvering by Sanderson for Shallan to be the one to tell them this, since this whole book is about truth and lies and words. And Jasnah isn't really dead, so this could be playing into that theme. Or I could just be overthinking it. It's more likely that Shallan is the one to tell them about Jasnah because this forms an unlikely bond between Navani and Shallan. At first, Navani doesn't want to accept Shallan because she feels Shallan is somewhat responsible for Jasnah's death. But over time, her grief fades and she grows close to Shallan, acknowledging that she did everything she could to save Jasnah, and she's carrying on what Jasnah wanted. When Shallan arrives, the other High Princes contest for her to stay with them. They all want to know more about the Copeland family and why Shallan is really here, so they offer her a room and a job. But Shallan studied the High Princes before the meeting and takes control of the situation by claiming that Sebarial already offered her a place in his princedom. Sebarial isn't the most politically savvy man, but he is a great businessman. He has used the relocation to the Shattered Plains to drive his own profits, and Shallan knows that he will likely accept her to get a leg up on Dalinar. And Shallan doesn't want to live in the same camp as Adolin, so she and Sebarial make a deal. Shallan receives a message from the Ghostbloods asking her for a meeting. She inhales Stormlight and begins to draw a new identity for herself. Shallan is becoming more adept at lightweaving, a power granted to her by her Order of Radiant. Lightweaving creates illusions out of Stormlight, using the Stormlight to fuel the illusion. The better the drawing, the more realistic the illusion. Shallan is able to draw human faces that she attaches to her own face, creating the perfect disguise. Shallan calls the disguise Veil. The name Veil could come from many different sources. There was a room called a Veil in the Palanium that Shallan used in the first book. A veil is also common in LDS theology as something that covers past sins or makes you forget your past. There's also the most on-the-nose explanation that the name Veil could come from a wedding veil that covers the bride's face. Shallan meets with the Ghostbloods. She's introduced to a man who goes by Meraze. Meraze is a world hopper like Hoyd. He tasks Shallan with investigating Amaram. Amaram knows things about Voidbringers and Desolations, and the Ghostbloods are trying to uncover the secrets of Urithiru because they want to access the Oath Gates. To explain their motivation in the simplest terms, the Ghostbloods are trying to export Stormlight off of Roshar since it's a renewable source of investiture, but that's some deep Cosmere lore, so we're getting ahead of ourselves. When Shallan leaves the meeting, she's trailed by a member of the Ghostbloods, but creates an illusion to get away. The Ghostbloods don't quite trust her yet. Shallan has lunch with Adolin. Even though Jasnah is supposedly dead, they agree to continue their betrothal. Shallan tries to act like an elegant, light-eyed noble, but Adolin's smile and kindness completely disarm her. She concludes that Adolin might not be the smartest man in the world, but he is genuine and seems altruistic. Adolin has a smiling, confident demeanor, but he never acts entitled. Adolin agrees to let Shallan come on a plateau assault with them so she can study chasm fiends. She also asks Adolin how people poop in their shard plates, and Adolin shakes his head in wonder at this mysterious woman. Shallan uses the disguise of a messenger boy to infiltrate Amaram's house. She finds notes and maps and discovers that Yasna, the Ghostbloods, and Amaram are all searching for the same things but for different reasons. Amaram wants to transform the Parshendi into Voidbringers to see his gods, the Heralds, return. Shallan uses a disguise as Amaram to sneak out information, and Pattern imitates Amaram's voice perfectly. Shallan learns that Amaram got his Shardblade from killing a red-haired Vedan man. Shallan cries as the assumptions of her brother's death are now confirmed. Mraize meets with Shallan, and he's extremely impressed by her abilities, since he had scouts posted near Amaram's quarters and none of them saw Shallan. Mraize finds out that Tin is indeed dead, killed by Shallan, but he doesn't attack or scold Shallan. He's actually impressed, and invites her to take on more tasks as a contractor of sorts for the Ghostbloods, which she accepts. Later, Shallan uses an illusion to hide her departure, but the Ghostbloods have her carriage attacked and the driver and Parshman killed. Shallan began to trust the Ghostbloods, but these are the same people who tried several times to murder Yasna, so their ruthlessness should not be underestimated. Adolin is a mess after Szeth's attack. He feels completely incompetent after getting tossed around by the assassin in white, so he begins to seek more training in fighting Surgebinders and obsesses over beating others in Shardbearer duels. To make matters worse, Adolin gets stuck in a shelter with Sadeas while they wait for the end of a high storm. Sadeas is conniving and depraved as usual, and he prods Adolin with insults and threats. Adolin says that Sadeas isn't just evil. He's a selfish, creme-crusted eel who is trying to strangle this kingdom with his bulbous bastard hand. Sadeas taunts Adolin further by attacking his loyalties, calling Dalinar a senile idiot. But it's those loyalties that help Adolin keep his composure. He knows that if he attacked Sadeas right now, it could cause a war, and Dalinar would be pissed at him. Adolin also meets with Eshonai on the Shattered Plains. Eshonai set up the meeting because she wanted to talk with Dalinar about a possible surrender or settlement, but since Eshonai has now taken storm form, her demeanor has changed. Stormform increases her bloodlust and desire for power, so she appears an entirely different person to Adolin. She says that the deal is off, and there's no possibility for a Parshendi surrender, and that the Alethi will all die. This stalls the end of the war, but Dalinar does see this as a positive, since he never felt right about killing the Parshendi in the first place. Knowing they still want to exterminate humans does give him some peace of mind. Adolin has a duel with Elit, and he plays with the man, making it look like a close fight and hopes to inspire others to take the bait. It doesn't really work, but it does infuriate the other Shardbearers. Shallan gets an idea while studying some of Yasna's history books. She finds a record of something called the Rite of Challenge. In an event where something spectacular or unexpected happens on the dueling grounds, the king may grant the dueler a boon. It happened some 20 years ago when Sadeas defeated a man in the dueling grounds, and Gavilar gave him the Rite of Challenge. Sadeas used it to challenge and kill one of their enemies, making room for Aladar to join the princedom. But Shallan says Adolin would have to do something spectacular to pull it off. Just then, Relis, the top dueler in Alethkar, barges into the camp to try to provoke Adolin into striking him, hence forfeiting his shards he just won against Elit. But Adolin doesn't do it. Instead, he challenges Relis to a duel and says that Relis can bring whomever he wants to the duel, and Adolin will fight him too. But Adolin doesn't specify how many people Relis can bring. It's implied that Relis can bring one other Shardbearer, but they never actually say it. Adolin wants a spectacle, and he wants a chance to fight Sadeas. After Adolin actually composed himself in front of Sadeas, he can't compose himself here. He agrees to a duel that could leave him crippled or dead, and his family without any shards. Kaladin continues his Windrunner training with the other members of Bridge 4. After seeing Szeth run on walls and throw Adolin around, Kaladin is more determined than ever to learn. Renarin decides that he wants to join Bridge 4. He's never really aligned with the Alethi politics and customs, and sees Bridge 4 as a way to be a real soldier. Renarin is desperate to be useful and to be accepted, so hanging out with the outcasts of society is his way of making something of his life. Some of the men, especially Moash, are apprehensive at the idea of a Light Eyes, someone who never endured bridge runs, joining their squad. But Kaladin ensures them that of all the Light-Eyed people to join, Renarin is the best, and it will make their job easier if they can commit fewer guards to protect Renarin. On the training grounds, Bridge 4 works on fighting Shardblades, something Kaladin is remarkably competent at. Moash opens up to Kaladin about why he hates Light Eyes so much. When he was younger, his grandparents were accused of a crime they didn't commit, so Elhokar put them in a dungeon for a few months to wait out their paperwork, where they eventually died. Moash claims that Elhokar sentenced them to death, so he wants to kill Elhokar. He reveals that he and some of the others were behind the assassination attempt on the king's life. Kaladin agrees to meet with them to learn more about the organization and report back to Dalinar. I've talked many times about how the Stormlight Archive encourages its readers to think more about the dichotomy between killing to protect and murder. Moash and Kaladin's story walks this ledge very closely. Is killing Elhokar actually better for the kingdom, or is it just petty vengeance? Sanderson's stories typically don't have purely evil antagonists. Moash is stubborn and petulant, but his anger is justified. Light Eyes have controlled Moash for his entire life, and now that he has the slightest bit of authority, he wants revenge. Kaladin gets permission from Dalinar to allow Shen, the docile Parshman, to hold a spear and be on the honor guard. Shen is deeply grateful that Kaladin doesn't treat him like a slave. He calls Kaladin a good man, and wants to say something more, but is interrupted by Moash. He and the other members of Bridge 4 go out drinking, where Kaladin meets the group of people who are trying to assassinate Elhokar. They call themselves the Patriots, and their arguments for wanting Elhokar dead are actually quite sound. Kaladin's moral dilemma that will plague him for the rest of this book begins to bud in his mind as his most trustworthy officer, the only true friend he has, is trying to assassinate the man he's in charge of protecting. Storms, what a mess, he thinks. Kaladin walks beyond the sight of the Watchman and successfully flies using his Windrunner abilities. It takes a while to learn, but lashing himself in different directions, changing his gravitational bond, allows him to soar like the assassin in white. He also contemplates how easy it would be to sneak into Amaram's camp and murder him like Szeth murdered Gavilar, but Syl talks some sense into him. This is a very interesting chapter because while Kaladin is actually considering flying into Amaram's house and killing him, Shallan is in Amaram's house impersonating him. At the same time, Shallan learns that Amaram is responsible for her brother's death, but the audience knows that it was actually Kaladin. The two characters are linked in several ways, and there's almost some crazy stuff that happens here. Kaladin guards Adolin and Shallan while the two go on a date. There are some great lines of dialogue in Words of Radiance, but one of my favorites is when Adolin chastises Kaladin for not having a sense of humor. Kaladin responds that he traded in his sense of humor. Adolin asks what he got in return, and Kaladin simply replies, scars. Kaladin overhears Adolin and Shallan's idea of the right of challenge, saying that Sadeas will never agree to it. He'll find a way to wither out of it like the eel he is. But they assure Kaladin that Sadeas can't, since he benefited from the same law earlier in his life. Kaladin gets an idea. Dalinar announces that he is refounding the Knights Radiant, and he believes Amaram is the man to lead them. Amaram isn't a Surgebinder, and Dalinar doesn't really know what he is doing assigning Amaram to such an important role. He does believe that Amaram is a good man, even after Kaladin told him about Amaram's betrayal. But Amaram is knowledgeable about the ancient magic of the Knights Radiant, Voidbringers, and of Urithiru, and Amaram is an important ally for Dalinar. It's said that Amaram tried to marry Yasna, but Yasna refused him, so maybe Dalinar is trying to sway Amaram to his side of this conflict, and assigning him this role is part of that. All that to say, Kaladin is pissed. He sees this as a betrayal by Dalinar, purposely giving the man lofty titles even when Kaladin, Dalinar's most trusted soldier, alleged some very serious crimes against Amaram. Kaladin knows that Dalinar is a good man, but this decision drives a wedge between Kaladin's duty and his hatred for Light Eyes. The entire Kholin force, Bridge 4, and most of the Alethi princes show up for Adolin's duel. As expected, since Adolin didn't specify 2 Shardbearers and agreed to a disadvantaged duel, Adolin is forced to fight 4 Shardbearers at once. Adolin is screwed. He's the best swordsman in Alethkar, probably Roshar, but even he can't fight 4 Shardbearers at once. He gets attacked all at once, pummeled from every direction. Adolin tries to yield, but he's attacked so violently that he can't get his hand up. They call it simple punishment. Renarin joins the fight, but he doesn't have Shardplate, so one of the attackers duels with him to keep him out of the fight while the others attack Adolin. Relis, Adolin's former friend, says that if he surrenders or stops the fight, they'll kill Renarin, so Adolin takes the beating. Dalinar is in the stands yelling at the judge to stop the fight, but she says that her authority supersedes his in this arena. Dalinar is frantically yelling at the crowd for someone to help his sons. "My sons fight alone," he yells. "There are Shardbearers among you. Is there not one of you who will fight with them?" He found Amaram's eyes, but Amaram looked away. "Please, Almighty," he thought. "What has happened to us? Where is our honor?" he says. "Honor is dead," a voice whispered from beside him. Kaladin took a deep breath, then looked at Dalinar. "But I'll see what I can do. If this goes poorly, take care of my men." Kaladin jumping into the arena to save Adolin and Renarin is one of the most beloved scenes in fantasy literature. Kaladin doesn't like Adolin, but he does respect him. He says Adolin is entitled and spoiled, but he knows that deep down Adolin is a man of honor. He saw it when Adolin was protecting that whore in the first book, and Renarin is now a member of Bridge 4, and we know that Kaladin has devoted his life to protecting members of Bridge 4. So to see him risk his life again after he just saved Dalinar and Adolin in the first book, and on top of that, Kaladin is genuine when he tells Dalinar to take care of his men. The selflessness to sacrifice yourself again in the name of protecting those who can't protect themselves makes Kaladin one of the best written characters in fiction. Kaladin dashes across the arena, When Adolin sees him, he asks what he's doing here. Playing one of the 10 fools, he replies. Welcome to the party, Adolin says. Kaladin and Adolin fight back-to-back momentarily to establish their strategy. Kaladin and Renarin will fight one of the Shardbearers, and Adolin will fight 2. The Shardbearers ignore Kaladin until he starts stabbing them in cracks in their armor. Their strategy looks like it will actually work. Adolin finally shows his competence in dueling, and even Kaladin is in awe at the man. Adolin violently attacked his first opponent and played with his second, so we haven't really seen him at his full capacity until now. Kaladin says that 2 against 1 might be an even fight for Adolin. Sanderson writes some of the best action scenes, and this might be his best, at least until Wind and Truth is released, where he says the best action scene he has ever written will take place. Since the Shardbearers keep ignoring Kaladin, he runs as fast as he can and lashes himself in the direction of Relis, increasing the lashing to make his kick extremely powerful, and it works. Kaladin cracks a huge part of Relis' armor. In the process, Kaladin's legs and feet are terribly broken, but he quickly uses Stormlight to heal himself. Adolin breaks part of Ellet's chest armor off, and Kaladin is able to slide under the man's hammer strike and smash his spear into his chest. Ellet yields. 1 down, 3 more to go. Kaladin yells at Ellet to give him his helm. He doesn't really know the rules, so Ellet looks at him like he's crazy, but he relents as Kaladin shoves the spear near his face. Kaladin uses the helmet as a makeshift shield. The Shardbearer fighting Renarin decides to come help his friends, so the other 2 Shardbearers attack Kaladin. Kaladin absorbs a ton of Stormlight, and using his small shield, is actually able to fend off 2 Shardbearers at once. Kaladin says that something deeper guided his steps. He calls himself the Wind, and you can't kill the Wind. Since Adolin is now fighting one man, he beats the Shardbearer quickly and hobbles over to help Kaladin. Adolin's plate is almost incapacitated, so he uses the weight of it to tackle one of the Shardbearers. Relis sees that he might actually lose the fight, so he finally stoops even lower and runs to attack Renarin. Kaladin chases him, but Relis stops just short of Renarin, then swings backward right at Kaladin. Kaladin catches the blade in midair, using the last clap he saw Dalinar use earlier. Since Kaladin can hear the dead Spren inside Shardblades, he and Relis hear an ear-piercing screech when Kaladin grabs the sword. Relis is terrified and runs away out of the arena, forfeiting the match. There's one more Shardbearer, the one Adolin has been wrestling. Kaladin grabs his knife and puts it at the man's neck. He then yields. Adolin quickly gets his armor off, and Elhokar announces that with such a spectacular duel, Adolin is granted a boon. Adolin yells, "For my boon, I demand the right of challenge. I demand the chance to duel High Prince Sadeas, right here and now, as redress for the crimes he committed against my house." Kaladin gets an idea. "And for my boon," he shouts, "I demand the right of challenge against the murderer Amaram. He stole from me and slaughtered my friends to cover it up. Amaram branded me a slave. I will duel him here, right now. This is the boon I demand." Elhokar has Kaladin arrested. Elhokar likens Kaladin's slander to treason and wants him executed. Dalinar persuades him to put Kaladin in a prison for the time being. Once Elhokar leaves, Kaladin scoffs at him, saying Elhokar ruined the day. Dalinar's calm demeanor evaporates, and he roars at Kaladin to act like a soldier and to forget about Amaram. Dalinar asks 17 different soldiers about Amaram, and they all had the same story. Kaladin is put in a cage and vows to never trust a Light Eyes. "Never again," he says. Lift is probably the most polarizing character Sanderson has written. She's sarcastic and irreverent, and she gives off an abrasive personality, but like most Knights Radiant, deep down, Lift is a good person. She mocks her friend Wendell, but does genuinely care for him. Lift is polarizing because her immaturity can get long-winded at times, and her banter with Wendell can sometimes border on bullying. While I understand the complaints about Lift, I do like her as a character. She has a ton of trauma that she interprets in different ways. Words of Radiance talks a lot about how we as humans interpret trauma differently, and it's some of the deepest character writing in the series. Kaladin and Shallan talk about their trauma and how they've interpreted it when they're in the cave together, so I'll save the details for then. Anyway, Lift and a group of thieves break into the Bronze Palace during the selection of a new Prime Aquisix. As they scale the walls, Lift notices that a man who's been following her shows up at the palace. She calls him Darkness, but this is actually Nale, the Herald, the same Nale that showed up in the prologue and that killed Yim in the earlier interlude. Nale wants to kill Lift because he believes stopping her will stop the coming of the Desolations. While the group's goal is to steal clothing, Lift deviates, exploring the palace with a boy named Gox. Lift just wants to steal food. Lift's body can turn food into Stormlight, which is why she's able to use so much of it and why she's always hungry. Sneaking into the dining hall, she overhears the Viziers discussing the challenges of selecting a new Prime, since the assassin in white keeps killing each one they appoint. Lift is caught by Nale, arrested, and prevented from escaping by a Larkin, a creature that drains her Stormlight. Though she manages to escape briefly, she is recaptured and Gox is killed. Lift decides to save him despite Wendell's warnings of her inexperience with her healing abilities. She successfully revives Gox, breathing Stormlight into his wound. Nale attempts to execute her, but Gox, now miraculously alive and elected as the new Prime Equisix because of his resurrection, pardons her. Nale obeys the new Prime's orders, releases Lift, and leaves. Lift's order of Knights Radiant is called Edge Dancer. Their surges are manipulating friction, they can slip out of the hands of others and slide across the ground, and progression, which allow the Surge Binder to heal other people. Lift is bonded to Wendell, a cultivation spren. Any more about Lift can be an Edge Dancer spoiler, so I'll save that for another video. Szeth sits atop Urithiru, and this is actually the first time we see the tower apart from Dalinar's visions. Szeth is an emotional mess. All the killing and suffering he's caused could have been nothing if indeed the Knights Radiant have returned. Eshonai is now in storm form, and it's transformed her into a malicious and ruthless killer. Eshonai forces the rest of the Parshendi to take the form or be killed. Eshonai and Venli know that the Alethi are planning an attack, so they hope to use storm form to generate a high storm powerful enough to kill the entire enemy army. Shallan is on a mission for the Ghostbloods. Pattern alerts her of someone following her, so she uses an illusion to confront the woman, attaching the illusion of Veil to Pattern and having him walk in front of her. This woman turns out to be a high-ranking Ghostbloods named Eyatil. Shallan is under instructions to investigate the madman that Dalinar and Elhokar are supposedly interested in. The madman turns out to be Talonel, one of the 10 heralds of the Almighty. Shallan breaks into the cell with Talonel, and he grabs Shallan and slams her against the wall. He seems to know that Shallan is a Radiant because his rambling stops for a short moment before he releases her and continues. Shallan's meeting with Talonel is interrupted by Amram's arrival, so Shallan uses an illusion to hide herself in the corner while Amram investigates Talonel. Amram is a religious man, and he's determined to see the heralds return to their former glory. He says that he and Gavilar have finally done it. Amram instructs Borden to find the honor blades that Talonel is rambling about. Since Eyatil saw Shallan sneak in and out of dangerous and important situations, she's promoted to an official member of the Ghostbloods. Shallan receives validation from the Ghostbloods, but it's thwarted by the realization that these people tried to kill Yasna. This is one of the major failures Shallan experiences in this story. She is so desperate to be competent, to show her competence to the world, that she gets mixed up with some bad people in the process. She earns their respect because she is extremely skilled and intelligent, but it forces her to align with murderers. Shallan's story involves deceitfulness and truth, illusion and transparency, but the more she shades herself in veil and deceives the Alethi about who she really is, she runs further and further from the darkness of her past. Shallan's story is about confronting that darkness, losing the illusion, and accepting herself for who she is. Her being caught up in the Ghostbloods and changing her identity is really the peak of this running. Kaladin is imprisoned following his request for a rite of challenge. He's visited by Wit, who tells him the story of Fleet. Fleet ran a great race, riding the storm, but he dies due to his effort, causing the storm to stop, though Fleet's soul then rises to win the race and ride the winds thereafter. Wit uses light weaving to make the story appear in Kaladin's mind, making it cinematic. This power is similar to what Shallan can do, but this is in someone else's mind. This type of power comes from the planet Yolen, which is a Cosmere planet that we don't know much about since there hasn't been an official book that takes place there yet. There are many theories about what Wit's story means, but the consensus is that it foreshadows Kaladin's journey in some way, that he will die but ascend to be honor. There's also the theory that Fleet is Szeth, since Shinovar is mentioned, and Szeth gets killed in this book, but he is resurrected. The most likely scenario, though, is that it's a metaphor for journey before destination. Kaladin mentions Fleet when he saves Elhokar at the end of the book. He says that Fleet kept running because the journey of running was more important in the end, that all men die in the end, so what truly matters is how well you run. Dalinar visits Kaladin, telling him that Elhokar will let him out of prison soon. Kaladin notes that Elhokar has a history of letting people rot in prison, referring to Moash's grandparents. Dalinar says that that is an event they'd all like to forget, but explains that Rashon, the city lord of Hearthstone, was actually at fault, but Elhokar sent him to a small town where he couldn't do any further damage. Kaladin scoffs at this, since Rashon is the main reason Kaladin's brother died and the reason he became such a broken and damaged man. After talking with Dalinar, learning that Elhokar is partially at fault for everything that's happened to him in Tien, Kaladin agrees with Moash that Elhokar is a terrible, murderous king and must be killed. He says that some people, like a festering finger or leg shattered beyond repair, just needed to be removed. Kaladin is finally pardoned and released from prison. On his way out, he sees Adolin also being released from his cell. Adolin thought it was wrong for Kaladin to be locked up, so he demanded that they lock him up as well. Adolin says that Kaladin saved his life, and more importantly, Renarn's. For that, Adolin will always be loyal to Kaladin. Up until this point, Adolin and Kaladin have constantly bickered at each other. They didn't truly hate each other, but they seemed too different, too strong-willed to be friends. But now, after Adolin put himself in prison, and after Kaladin saved Renarin, the two trust and respect each other more than ever. Adolin instantly believes Kaladin about Amram, and doesn't blame Kaladin for the way he asked for a boon, telling him that Elhokar was the one that ruined it by throwing a tantrum. Since Adolin and Kaladin won so many shards, they now have a full set gifted to Kaladin. Except, just like last time, Kaladin doesn't accept them. He gives them to Moash. Of all the failures Kaladin has made so far, this is perhaps the greatest. Kaladin still can't take up the sword for fear of turning into a Light Eyes, and he can't accept them because he knows that Syl hates that humans wield shard blades because they are dead spren. But by entrusting the shards to Moash, he gives weight to Moash's vengeance. He officially breaks his bond with Syl because he agrees that Elhokar should die, and by trusting Moash with the shards, he encourages Moash's hatefulness and corruption. After realizing that Moash was right about Elhokar, Kaladin struggles to absorb Stormlight like he used to. Syl begins to show herself less and less, and even acts like a normal windspren. Kaladin realizes that he'd made two conflicting promises to Moash and Dalinar which violate the Code of Honor. Since he's broken his oaths to Dalinar, this temporarily breaks Kaladin's bond with Syl, nearly killing her. The records of Dalinar's visions get publicly posted, though with a mocking tone. Dalinar addresses a crowd of laughing people, saying he doesn't care if people ridicule him. This is another attempt from Sadeas to undermine Dalinar, though, of course, Dalinar isn't easily shaken by words or opinions of others. Wit cryptically tells Dalinar that he is terrified of the coming storm and of the father of hatred, which is odium. While on a scouting expedition on the plains, Kaladin notices a man who used to work in Sadeas' camp working the mechanical bridges that the entire group crosses. He cries out a warning, and just then the man pulls a lever to deactivate the bridge. Adolin and Dalinar are able to get off just in time, but Shallan and Kaladin fall into the chasm. Using what little Stormlight Kaladin has, he's able to survive the fall. Shallan doesn't have the whole Spider-Man 2 losing powers problem, so she absorbs Stormlight and easily survives. Kaladin and Shallan are both glad the other survived, but disappointed to be stuck together. They have a budding rivalry of sorts since Shallan made Kaladin give her his boots when they first met. Kaladin doesn't trust her and calls her pampered and spoiled. Shallan compares the two of them by saying, the happy, smiling, radiant lady and the dark, brooding bridgeman. The two continue to bicker until Kaladin tells Shallan that she probably had a sunny, wonderful life with everything she ever wanted. Sorrow is not your companion, he says. But Shallan surprises Kaladin by showing that she does understand sorrow. She understands the deepest chasm of misery. She describes it as being powerless to help those around you. They break the ones you love, and not you, she says. And you plead, can't you beat me instead? Kaladin sees the anger and brokenness in Shallan that he sees in himself, manifested in a different way. He calls it the most beautiful thing he's ever seen. I mentioned earlier how Words of Radiance covers trauma and the result of dealing with that trauma in different ways. Kaladin saw an insurmountable amount of death. He saw his father be used, and he watched his brother die. He dealt with this by closing himself off to the world, by hating the men and society that put him there. His failures to protect others have made him a hard, damaged man. Now, he obsesses over protecting others, as if it's the only way to possibly heal his wounds. Shallan, on the other hand, saw death and subjugation, but approached it in a different way. She was equally powerless to stop the killing, but manifested that trauma into running from her problems and hiding her real emotions. Vale is the embodiment of running from this darkness, running from her pain. She even says that Vale doesn't have the brokenness that Shallan had, so she would rather be her instead. Shallan and Kaladin hear a chasm fiend, so they run as fast as they can away from it. They continue talking and eventually are able to get some sleep. The high storm is coming soon, and with the fast floods that will fill the chasm, they are short on time. Kaladin ventures away from Shallan and tries to yell for Syl. She hasn't appeared since they fell into the chasm, and Kaladin grows increasingly worried that his broken oaths have killed her. Shallan and Kaladin run into a chasm fiend again, and this time they are able to hide in a crevice in the rock. Kaladin says he's going to distract the beast, so Shallan gives him her shard blade. Kaladin is dumbfounded that Shallan has a blade, and that he doesn't hear screaming when he touches this one. He runs out of the crevice and distracts the beast. He gets cornered, but is able to defend himself with the shard blade. Chasm Fiend hits him in the leg, and he's not able to heal himself with Stormlight. Right before the Chasm Fiend is about to attack him, he sees an illusion of himself above him. Shallan had used Pattern to create an illusion distracting the Chasm Fiend briefly. Kaladin's able to stab the beast through the head, killing it. Surviving the Chasm Fiend attack was only part of their problem, since the floods will be coming soon. Kaladin gets an idea to use the shard blade to cut a cubby in the stone above the water line. Shallan is able to do it, and Kaladin is able to climb the rock formation just in time to survive. Shallan and Kaladin huddle together in the cubby and wait out the storm. Shallan asks Kaladin to tell her his life story to distract from the high storm. He shares everything. It gushes out of him like a broken dam. Shallan tells Kaladin her story too, and the two of them share a deep connection. This is one of the greater mysteries in the Stormlight Archive to me. Kaladin and Shallan share a very intimate moment together, and they seem to genuinely understand and care for each other, but their relationship isn't really touched upon in the later books, and this scene is nearly forgotten. My understanding of this scene is that it's used to show Shallan's brokenness, and her attraction to Kaladin is embracing that part of her but not fixing it, hiding from her responsibilities and duties as the betrothed to Adel and Kholin. Part of her arc is accepting her role as a Radiant, and this relationship with Kaladin is her running from that role. If you had a different interpretation of this, let me know. During the storm, Kaladin has a vision where he sees the Stormfather. The Stormfather calls him Child of Honor and tells Kaladin that Syl is indeed dead. Kaladin's broken oaths killed her. Kaladin pleads with the Stormfather to help him fix it. Syl is slowly becoming another person that Kaladin failed to save. Dalinar is planning his expedition deep into the Shattered Plains to wipe out the Parshendi and end the war. He hopes to do it before the ominous countdown reaches its final day. Dalinar talks with Teft about Kaladin. Teft and the other bridgemen have zero doubts that Kaladin survived despite falling at least 80 feet. Dalinar cannot believe the faith that these men have in their leader. Just as the bridgemen suspected, Kaladin returns to the war camp. Dalinar sprints across the entire camp to meet him. Every time Kaladin and Dalinar share an intense or emotional conversation, it's usually some of the best lines in the book, and this scene is no different. Dalinar asks him how he survived, how he killed the Chasm Fiend, and how his men knew he would return. He asks Kaladin, "I've been searching for you, haven't I?" Kaladin knows that Dalinar is trying to refund the Knights Radiant, but he shakes his head sadly and tells him no. Maybe at one time he was, but not anymore. "I'm sorry," he says. Dalinar knows something is wrong because Shallan and Kaladin give him a bogus answer about how they survived and how they killed the Chasm Fiend, but he doesn't prod. Dalinar is about to ask Shallan to join him on their expedition deep into the Shattered Plains, but she surprises him by asking to go before he can. Shallan has made several maps and drawings of the plains and hopes to find the Oath Gate that can take them to Urithiru. In the last flashback, a year and a half before the Way of Kings starts, Shallan and her brothers plan to leave their abusive father and his destructive behavior. Lyn beats his new wife to death to get the information out of her. Balat fights Lyn but is easily cast aside by their father. Shallan brings him wine that is poisoned with blackbane. Then Balat attacks again, stabbing Lyn in the chest, but the soulcaster in Lyn's pocket blocks the blade. Lyn stabs Balat in the leg with a fire poker, calling all of his children useless before he falls to the floor from the poison Shallan gave him. Shallan realizes that the poison has only paralyzed him, so she thanks her father for everything he did for her, then wraps her necklace around his neck. She twists the necklace around the handle of a fork for leverage, crying and whispering the lullaby that he'd sung to comfort Shallan in her childhood as he dies. The interlude with Lan and Pai shows the current state of Kholinar, where Elhokar's wife, the Queen, has been in charge for the last few years. It's been mentioned that Kholinar is in bad shape, partly because of the Queen, but this chapter shows just how bad it is. Pai is a new Ardent who, after seeing how much food the Queen wastes and how the Ardents just do whatever they want as long as the Queen is happy, paints a giant glyph describing the Queen as one of the 10 fools. Pai is executed and riots break out. This scene is very important for the next book. Venli and Eshonai discuss their battle strategy for the upcoming attack. With their new form, they mention that they can call a high storm, and with the upcoming Everstorm, they'll wipe out the Alethi army. The last interlude shows Taravangian, the king of Yakaved and Szeth's current master. Taravangian once visited the Night Watcher, a sentient spren that grants any boon but comes with a curse. Dalinar visited the Night Watcher, but more details on that in the Oathbringer video. When Taravangian visited the Night Watcher, he asked for capacity to stop what was coming, capacity to save humankind. This boon granted him days of extreme intelligence, but his intelligence is contrasted by a lack of compassion, and the days by which these two attributes show themselves vary randomly. One day, Taravangian is the smartest person in the world, capable of creating a ledger for everything that's going to happen in the future, but his compassion is almost non-existent. He's cold and completely heartless, capable of killing children without a thought for the morality of his actions. Other days, he wakes up and cries over the deaths he has caused and appears senile since his intelligence is so low. So Taravangian takes a test every morning to determine how smart he is. Most days are average intelligence, average compassion. This ledger that Taravangian created forms a group called the Diagram, where they follow everything the book says. Moash's group of assassins mention the Diagram. Taravangian believes the Diagram to be a secret code from the Night Watcher with the secrets to saving mankind. The Diagram told him to take Szeth's Zoastone and to have Szeth kill the other High Princes in Yakaved so that Taravangian could be king. Taravangian studies the death rattles because he believes they will help him update the Diagram. Taravangian visits the aftermath of a battle in Videnar. The battle is of a civil war that he started, but he's cheered and applauded for bringing medical supplies. Szeth appears and tells Taravangian that Dalinar has a Surgebinder. This is terrifying news for Taravangian because Szeth will no longer obey if Surgebinders have returned. It's mentioned that Szeth was bound to an Oathstone because he thought the Knights Radiant in Surgebinding had returned. So if he was right, then he shouldn't be a slave to the holder of the stone any longer. Taravangian tells Zeth that Kaladin has an honor blade like him. This is obviously a lie, but it seems to calm Zeth down. It seems like Zeth knows he's right, but if he can kill Kaladin, then he won't have to face that reality, so he heads towards the Shattered Plains. Kaladin is still recovering from the Chasm Fiend attack and can't sleep because he thinks he killed Syl. Lopin recommends getting her a hat because women love hats. The two of them walk outside to see the army off. Dalinar and Roion prepare to march against the Parshendi before Sebarial joins them. Sebarial likely sees a way to make money out of it, but he appears to be a decent man, so Dalinar accepts it. Aladar, one of the High Princes who allied with Sadeas, also joins, saying that he can't sit by while the two weakest High Princes, Roion and Sebarial, fight to avenge the Vengeance Pact. Dalinar helped Aladar early in the book, and he has seen the conniving and evil ways Sadeas operates, so he joins the fight as well. On their way out, Dalinar ushers Amram over to Kaladin and demands Amram apologize. At first, Kaladin thinks that Dalinar is asking him to apologize, but thankfully for everyone, Dalinar finally exposes Amram. Dalinar is finally learning to think strategically, and he exposes Amram by using the fake cache of Shardblades, then getting Amram to lie about it. Even though Dalinar checked with 17 different men, and they all have the same story about Amram, Kaladin's decision to save his sons and Amram's business decision to sit aside while they almost died made Dalinar reconsider these accounts, saying, "If you had been willing to murder for one blade, you would certainly lie for a second." As I mentioned earlier, Dalinar teased Amram with Shardblades, and Amram actually gets one, but he tells Dalinar that his search came up empty. Dalinar had already bonded the blade, so he just resummoned it to get it back. Amram says that what he did was genuinely in the best interest of Alethkar, and that a few lives are worth saving hundreds in the process. Amram then condemns Dalinar, asking if it's any different for him to send men to their deaths to capture gem hearts on the Shattered Plains. Kaladin cannot believe what he is seeing. Amram actually believes what he is doing is right. With the Everstorm coming and Voidbringers and Desolations, is Amram wrong? I've said this many times, but the Stormlight Archive is about killing to save, something horrible in the name of something wonderful. Taravangian calls himself the monster that will save this world. If you knew killing a few innocent men would save the world, would you do it? That's why these books explore the path of such means. Journey before destination is about how we do something, not the why. Dalinar says that it is the path that separates men, not the end. The series discusses this topic further, so I'll keep talking about it later. Shallan and Navani have a moment together where they bond over their admiration of Yasna and how much they both miss her. Navani was initially cold towards Shallan because she believed Shallan could have done something to help when Yasna was murdered. Shallan tells Navani that Yasna's interest in the Knights Radiant stemmed from being one. She also tells Dalinar about her own powers and that the Radiants have indeed returned. Through Shallan, Dalinar learns that instead of refunding the Knights Radiant, he should be trying to gather them instead. Their conversation is interrupted by a sighting of a single Parshendi who appears to surrender. This Parshendi is R'lain, the same Parshman that was part of Bridge 4. R'lain was a Parshendi spy for about 3 years. Since he looked just like a Parshman, no one really questioned him. This is a bit confusing because in the later books, and this isn't a spoiler, the Parshmen who have transformed say their minds were dull, that they really couldn't think for themselves. And this is only somewhat true for R'lain because while his mind wasn't at 100% capacity, he was more cognizant than other Parshmen. It appears that the intelligence of dull-form Parshmen does vary. R'lain says that Eshonai and the rest of the listeners have changed, and that their evil gods now possess their bodies. Shallan knows that this means the Voidbringers have officially returned. Shallan tells Dalinar that if she can find the Oathgate, she can teleport them to Urithiru. Shallan's map of the Shattered Plains is slowly coming together as she visits more areas, and she learns that the landscape is symmetrical. This is something that shows up often in these books, since many of the major cities have symmetrical shapes. Dalinar says that their priority is wiping out the Voidbringers, but they can use the Oathgate to escape if needed. A man points out that Shallan's map of the Shattered Plains is wrong, that she missed a crucial rock formation that deviated from the perfect symmetrical shape. Shallan concludes that the most circular rock, and the only deviant on the entire map, must be the Oathgate. Shallan and Renarin cut a hole in a rock to enter the circular plateau and see 10 equal divisions in the floor mural and an 11th narrower one representing Urithiru. Renarin falls to his knees in what looks like one of his epileptic episodes, but instead he starts saying that they are all dead, and asks why the Almighty cursed him with powers to see the future. The Everstorm that has been hinted at throughout the book slowly begins to arrive, and the winds start to blow in the opposite direction. Kaladin mopes around the empty war camps. He's still injured, and he can't heal himself instantly with Stormlight, so he mostly just sits around and waits out the rain. He's visited by Moash, and their conversation is monumental in Kaladin's journey in this book. Kaladin says that Syl left because of the plot to kill the king, that a Radiant can't be involved in murder. Moash replies that a Radiant should care about doing what's right, even if it means a difficult decision. Kaladin says that sometimes lives must be spent for the greater good. Moash agrees fervently, But Kaladin tells him that that's what Amaram said about killing his friends. Kaladin finally sees what Syl has been trying to tell him. Moash believes that he's saving the kingdom by killing Elhokar, but Syl reminds Kaladin that Windrunners are about protecting the weak, protecting those that can't protect themselves, protecting even those you hate. Kaladin so desperately wants to do what is right, but now he can barely walk, let alone fight. Without Syl, he is useless. Elhokar visits Kaladin in his camp and questions Kaladin about how he is such a great leader and hero. Elhokar wants Kaladin to teach him how to get people to respect him. He says that every time he tries to punish someone, he's a cruel ruler. Every time he tries to be merciful, he's seen as a pushover. His own council won't even listen to him, and Kaladin won't even visit him when he summons him. Kaladin suggests Elhokar resigning, which angers Elhokar, but just before he's about to leave, he says that Kaladin made the shadows disappear, that there's light when Kaladin's around. Everyone admires Kaladin, which is why Elhokar got so mad when Kaladin saved Renarin and Adolin. Elhokar was jealous of Kaladin being a hero, of being respected, so he retaliated like a child. Throughout the book, Elhokar has been whining about no one respecting his authority, and that Dalinar is really the one in charge. But now, Elhokar finally looks inward at his own mistakes, and realizes he's caused them. He vows to be better, or at least try. Although Elhokar is incompetent and a terrible king, he does try. His sincerity is what makes Kaladin question everything. Dalinar and the Alethi army wait on the plateau in the rain of the weeping. They begin to see glowing red eyes on the other side of the plains, and hear them sing a song. R'lain says that this is the song of death, power, and destruction. Dalinar prepares his men for an upcoming battle, giving another epic speech. He says that I have been sent by the Almighty himself to save this land from another desolation. I have seen what those things can do. I have lived lives broken by the Voidbringers. I've seen kingdoms shattered, people ruined, technology forgotten. I've seen civilization itself brought to the trembling edge of collapse. We will prevent this. Today you fight not for the wealth of the Light Eyes, or for even the honor of your king. Today you fight for the good of all men. You will not fight alone. Trust in what I have seen. Trust in my words. If those things have returned, then so have the forces that once defeated them. We will see miracles before this day is out, men. We merely have to be strong enough to deserve them. The battle commences. Kaladin is still back at camp, wounded and grumpy. He goes looking for Wit, but finds Zahel, the old swordmaster, instead. Kaladin is looking for advice, so he asks Zahel if he's ever had to make a decision between two distasteful choices. Zahel says that Kaladin should do whatever will help him sleep at night. Kaladin then stands in the rain and yells at the sky that Elhokar deserves it. He says he's tried to be a good king, but he's failing. He continues saying, "It's right to remove the wounded limb. This is what we have to do." Kaladin stops himself. He was about to say that this is what we have to do to stay alive, which is the same thing the commander in Tien's squadron said to him when he sacrificed Tien. Kaladin sees what he is becoming. He thinks that it wasn't Tien's fault. Tien had tried. He'd still failed. So they'd killed him, just like they're trying to do to Elhokar. Elhokar was Dalinar's Tien. Adolin leads a company of soldiers across the plateaus to wipe out the red-eyed Parshendi. On his way, Sureblood, his Rashadium horse, gets struck by the mysterious red lightning and dies. Adolin gets struck as well, but his shard plate easily stops the lightning from causing harm. Adolin becomes a butcher of Parshendi, unleashing weeks of pent-up anticipation. He easily kills hundreds of enemy warriors. He feels disgusted with himself until Eshonai shows up and challenges him. Finally, a fight he could handle. Thank you, he thinks. Eshonai is certainly skilled with the blade, but Adolin is the greatest dueler in the world. He was always interested in dueling, making it a craft he obsessed over to become the greatest, but he knew it wasn't meaningful to be competent in something that didn't really matter. But now, his training pays off. He beats Eshonai, not for selfish reasons or for plate, but does it to protect the world. Eshonai hisses that she will bring annihilation to humans, but Adolin stops her, ramming his broken shard plate into her body, sending her falling into a chasm. Adolin is about to fall himself, but Scar and Drehi are able to grab him. One of the pillars of Adolin's character is his acceptance of other people. He never judges or mocks people based on their social standing or appearance. He jokes with Bridgeman and Dark-Eyed alike. He judges people based on their actions and is intensely loyal to those he judges well. This is why I love seeing that behavior pay off in such a lighthearted way. Scar and Drehi barely get mentioned in the first two books. Sanderson has even said that he based them off his real-life friends because there were so many Bridge 4 characters he was running out of ideas. So Adolin's undiscriminating nature is what ends up saving his life. Adolin isn't the deepest character in the Stormlight Archive, but he's one of the most likable. His loyalties to his brother and father, and eventually Kaladin and Shallan, is what defines Adolin, and that's why he does anything. Adolin sees a messenger stride directly to him, except it's not a messenger, it's Szeth, the assassin in white. Dalinar's army is taking massive losses. Many of the battalions have been pushed back or defeated, and Roion's forces are in grave danger. The voice of the Almighty that appears in his visions suddenly starts talking to him, although not through an avatar like in his visions. He says that he is but a sliver of the Almighty that Odium killed, but he is indeed the Stormfather, a sentient and very powerful Spren who is the Spren of high storms. Then the Stormfather says that his daughter is disobeying and has to leave. Kaladin is walking the steps of the king's palace. His leg is screaming in pain every step he takes up the switchbacks. He arrives at the palace, but sees two different guards, Graves' men, who are there to make sure the assassination attempt goes according to plan. Kaladin fights them both, and is able to make it to Elhokar, but sees him passed out, drunk to the point of incoherence. Kaladin gets under Elhokar's arm and begins to pull him away. When they arrive in the hallway, one of the men from Graves' crew is back up and attacks Kaladin. He stabs Elhokar, and seems to get Kaladin with the blade as well, since Elhokar knows that Kaladin is bleeding too. Kaladin kills the man, then Moash and Graves show up in Shardplate. Moash asks why he's doing this, and Kaladin says that he didn't understand before what he does now. If he gets to decide who to protect, then it only matters what he thinks. It is selfish to make those kind of decisions, so Kaladin says that he must protect people because they deserve to be protected, because it is the right thing to do. Moash breaks Kaladin's spear and punches him in the stomach. The blow is so hard, Kaladin feels like his ribs explode out of his chest. Moash and Graves argue about how to make it look like the assassin in white did it, but Kaladin gets up. Arms and legs shaking from exhaustion and pain, Kaladin stands and says, "You will not have him." Kaladin hears Syl in the distance arguing with the Stormfather about broken oaths. The Stormfather says that Kaladin has broken his oath, and that he is going to kill Syl. Syl yells back that she doesn't care. She tells Kaladin to say the words, pleading with him to speak the words like she did when Kaladin saved Dalinar the first time. Kaladin whispers through bloody lips, "I will protect even those I hate, so long as it is right." The Stormfather rumbles that these words are accepted. Syl yells for Kaladin to stretch out his hand. He can barely move, but he obeys. Suddenly, a glowing, brilliant shardblade emerges from the mist. It says that Kaladin gasps a deep breath as if coming awake for the first time. The entire hallway blacked out as the stormlight and every lamp down the length of the hall winked out. For a moment, they stood in darkness. Then, Kaladin exploded with light. Kaladin is a son of Stormlight, and Moash and Graves run away. Graves mentioned the diagram forcing them to separate Kaladin from Dalinar. Kaladin realizes that Dalinar is in trouble and shoots off towards the Shattered Plains. Dalinar is trying to keep his armies together when Adolin crashes through the tent on his back, Shardplate almost completely destroyed. Dalinar knows the only person on Roshar that could have done this to his son is Szeth. Dalinar tells Adolin that he's proud of him, that Adolin is truly a good man, not like himself, that he will lead their house well. Dalinar faces Szeth. He waves off Bridge 4, not wanting them to die in the crossfire. Dalinar asks Szeth why he killed his brother. Szeth replies that he does not question his master's demands. Dalinar rushes Szeth. He fights masterfully, moving with grace and speed not normal for a man his age. This could be a hint at the earliest bond with the Stormfather. Adolin is trying to get his armor off to help his father, but can't quite manage the weight of Shardplate, until Scar and Drehy show up to help him. He says, "You two are getting a storming raise." Szeth punches Dalinar in the chest, breaking his ribs. Dalinar has one final peaceful moment where he realizes that all those years ago, he wouldn't have been able to save Gavilar. Szeth is too powerful. The weight he's been carrying for 6 years finally lifts. Szeth is about to slay Dalinar before Roion jumps on Szeth's back and stops him. Roion was constantly called a coward by Sabariel and other high princes throughout the book, but Dalinar stood up for the man, so he rewards that kindness by sacrificing himself to save Dalinar. Szeth lashes Roion into the sky, sending the man hundreds of feet into the air and smacking down on the ground, killing him instantly. Szeth does the same to Dalinar, sending him flying into the air. Adolin screams and attacks Szeth, who parries easily, breaking Adolin's wrist. Just before Szeth is about to kill Adolin, they both see Dalinar slowly floating to the ground. I'll read directly from the book for this. And then, like a falling star, a blazing fireball of light motion shot down in front of Dalinar, sending out a ring of stormlight like white smoke. At the center, a figure in blue crouched with one hand on the stones, the other clutching a glowing shard blade. His eyes afire with light that somehow made the assassin seem dull by comparison. He wore the uniform of a bridgeman and bore the glyphs of slavery on his forehead. The expanding rink of smoky light faded, save for a large glyph, a sword-like shape, which remained for a brief moment before puffing away. "You sent him to the sky to die, assassin," Kaladin says, stormlight puffing from his lips. "The sky and winds are mine. I claim them, as I now claim your life." Szeth is horrified to see Kaladin flying. Dalinar is awestruck and says, "You are what I've been looking for." Kaladin replies, "Yes, finally." Adolin says that he knew something was off about Kaladin. Parshendi have summoned a full storm by this point, using their storm form. With the Everstorm approaching, a storm that blows the opposite direction, it will mean devastation for every person on the plains. Dalinar commands his armies to get to the plateau with Shallan because they are going to try to use the portal. Shallan works quickly to try to find the solution for getting the Oathgate to work. Renarin is having some sort of episode in the corner, screaming about how they're going to die, so Shallan yells for someone to shut him up. Adolin arrives and realizes that Shallan is a Radiant too. They try to use Adolin's Shardblade to activate the Oathgate, but Shallan realizes that these Oathgates were operated by Radiants, who would have used their own spren as the blade. She summons Pattern as a Shardblade and rams him into the keyhole. All of the Stormlight is drained, and they are transported to Urithiru. It worked. Kaladin whispers to Syl, "You ready?" And she replies, "Of course." Szeth has haunted Bridge 4 in the Colands for years. Now it's time for it to end. He vows to never let this monster kill another person. Syl turns into a Shardblade and Kaladin attacks. The two fly in the air, boosted by a massive influx of Stormlight that the storm is granting them. Szeth clings to the idea that Kaladin has an honor blade, and that's why he's able to do this. They both stab each other, but they are able to heal immediately. Szeth boasts that he will win due to his experience, but Kaladin says that the sky is and was always his. Szeth screams that he is truthless, and fervently denies that Kaladin is a Radiant. Finally, after seeing Syl change into a spear, and the Windspren, and the way he uses Stormlight, Szeth acknowledges that Kaladin is indeed a Radiant. Kaladin says that Szeth is not evil, just a coward, and stabs him through the chest, severing his spine. Szeth falls hundreds of feet to the ground. Kaladin asks Syl about the blade Szeth used. She says it's not like the other Shard Blades, or Radiant Blades. Although not mentioned in this book, Honor Blades are the original Shard Blades. They are slivers, or pieces of the god Honor. They don't require a spren to be bonded, or 10 heartbeats to be summoned. But they do open Oathgates, which is important. Syl and Kaladin share a moment where Kaladin thanks her for coming back. Syl says that proper payment for almost killing her is compliments and a sincere smile. Kaladin shakes his head and laughs. Kaladin meets up with Bridge 4, and they use the Oathgate to travel to Urithiru with the rest of the army. Kaladin meets up with Dalinar, but is interrupted by Navani asking about Elhokar. Kaladin says that he put the king somewhere safe. Kaladin's arc in Words of Radiance is perfectly tied up with his swearing of the third ideal. His heart is constantly in conflict about what is right. Kaladin's deep-seated belief that he must protect others is a defense mechanism for his own inadequacy. But this book is his arc overcoming that selfish ideal and protecting people because they deserve to be protected, not for selfish reasons, but because it's the right thing to do. Elhokar's safe place is with Lopen and his family. They berate Elhokar for not eating his food. Then Lopen inhales Stormlight and his arm begins to grow back. Another aspect of Knights Radiant that we learn is that they had squires who could use Stormlight. This is a major part of the next book, so I'll talk about it more then. Moash is leaving the Shattered Plains with Graves. Moash is disgusted with himself for betraying Bridge 4. Graves tells him that he is a patriot of the organization called the Diagram. The Diagram is what Taravangian uses to justify his actions. Shallan walks the halls of Urithiru, the massive castle that is a city all by itself. It's kind of like Minas Tirith from Lord of the Rings, except Urithiru is one massive building that could take weeks to explore, whereas Minas Tirith is more of a city built on a mountain. At least that's how it was in the movies. Shallan runs into Mraize, her point of contact for the Ghostbloods. Mraize invites Shallan on a task for the Ghostbloods, and also says that he has her brothers. Shallan draws her blade at the mention of blackmail, but Mraize says that he's giving her brothers to her as a gift, in hopes that she'll officially join the Ghostbloods. He disappears before Shallan can tell him her decision. Right after this, Pattern tells her it's finally time to face her past. Shallan has been running from every problem, forcing them to the back of her mind to deal with later, but Pattern's insistence wears her down, and she creates a vision of her mother's death. In the vision, Shallan's mother and an associate attack Shallan and try to kill her, but Shallan has already bonded a Spren and spoken the oaths, so Pattern becomes a Shardblade in her hands and she kills her mother and the associate. Her father takes the blame to protect Shallan. This causes intense instability in the Devar household, which led to Helloran leaving, their father's subsequent rage, Balat's fascination with death, Wickham's depression, and Jusu's gambling addiction. There's several scenes where Shallan thinks about a terrible act she committed as a child, and every time it comes up, she forces the memory down, managing to forget the murder. Words of Radiance, and more particularly Shallan's story, is about her relationship with Pattern and the truth and lies she tells herself. Pattern is the perfect counterpart to Shallan's character arc because his whole persona is about lies that Shallan manifests on her face and the lies she tells herself. Shallan's arc is about accepting and facing the painful truths that she's buried about her past, particularly her role in her parents' deaths. Her humor, her art, and her light weaving are all outlets for this darkness that Shallan is hiding from. However, they also become tools for avoidance. Shallan is constantly running from her deepest pain, afraid that confronting it will shatter her entirely. Shallan's light-weaving abilities, which rely on truth and perception, are closely tied to her psychological state. It is only when she learns to embrace the darkness and face the truth that she begins to heal. Her final moments in this book show her stepping into her role as a Radiant, no longer defined by her past trauma, but by her ability to face it and use it as a source of strength. That's why Shallan saving everyone on the Shattered Plains was so significant to her story, because Adolin tried to use his Shardblade, but only a Radiant can do it. Shallan unconsciously suppressed that part of her identity because it's why her mother tried to kill her and why she was able to kill her mother. Another part of Shallan's arc is her relationship with Adolin, because at the very end she kisses him passionately with real love. The side of Shallan that is attracted to Kaladin is Shallan's darker side, the part of her that would rather ignore her problems and trauma. But by being with Adolin, she embraces her role as a Radiant, content with a man that doesn't share her darkness. The death of Shallan's mother isn't perfectly explained, but here's what we know so far. Shallan's mother was part of an organization called the Skybreakers, led by the Herald Nale. The Skybreakers are an order of Knights Radiant that never abandon their oaths on the Day of Recreance. Nale believes that if the Knights Radiant returned, then so will the Desolations, which is where he endured intense torture. So he's been killing any person that bonds his friend / becomes a Radiant. That's why he killed Yim in an earlier interlude and why he tried to kill Lift in her interlude. Shallan's mother was part of this organization, and she knew that her daughter was beginning to surgebind somehow. So her mother and this associate of Nale attack Shallan, and she summons Pattern to kill them both. Shallan's father locks the blade away in a box, but Pattern just escapes. Then Shallan's father takes the blame, and it's assumed that this associate was Shallan's mother's secret lover, making the motivation for Lynn Devar identifiable. We don't know much about this associate as of now. Amaram is walking the halls of Urithiru, reflecting on his success that the Voidbringers and Heralds have returned. Amaram has Talonel, the Herald, locked up, and he goes to visit him in a cubby deep in Urithiru. But Talonel is able to use some sort of inhuman speed to save him by grabbing 2 darts out of the air before they can hit Amaram. Talonel returns to his incoherent rambling. Szeth wakes up, hoping he had died, but irate that he's still alive. Nale, the Herald who has shown up in like 8 different scenes, restored Szeth's body after Kaladin beheaded him. Each Order of Radiants have an attribute or trait tied to them. The Skybreakers' main attribute is order and justice. Nale says that Szeth kept to his personal code when others would have fled or crumbled. He says that order is the only genuine beauty in the world, so he invites Szeth to join the Skybreakers and gives him a talking shardblade. This shardblade is called Nightblood, and it's from the book Warbreaker. Zahel had this blade in Warbreaker, but somehow the blade got in Nale's possession. Nightblood is a sword that was created using magic from Warbreaker's world. In essence, they used a form of investiture to create the sword and give it a command to destroy evil. But Nightblood doesn't know what evil is since it's a sword, so it has a cheerful bloodlust that is both hilarious and frightening. Szeth accepts Nale's offer because he wants to get back at the Shin people for making him truthless. Adolin is walking the halls of Urithiru and runs into Sadeas. Sadeas claims that Dalinar contacted the Parshendi and this entire fiasco was a setup. Adolin asks why Sadeas is like this. Sadeas says that he and Dalinar are 2 old white spines fighting for control of a kingdom. It's him or me, he says. Adolin says it doesn't have to be that way. Sadeas' face then darkens and he says, I will take this from him. This city, these discoveries, it's just a setback. After so long of forcing himself to remain calm in front of Sadeas, Adolin finally snaps. That's it, he thinks. Adolin attacks Sadeas, grabbing his throat and slamming him against the wall. He says, my father says I'm a better man than he is. Unfortunately for you, he's wrong. And he stabs Sadeas in the head, killing him. With all the craziness of this book, this might be the wildest moment. Sadeas has poked and prodded Dalinar and Adolin for so long. He mocked every member of the Kholin family openly, admitting to being responsible for the deaths of some 6,000 soldiers. Adolin, the character who's known for his temper, has been forced to let Sadeas walk over him, but he finally can't handle it anymore. My favorite part about this situation is that it was Sadeas' idea to goad Adolin into accepting a duel against 4 people. He used Adolin's temper to further his conniving ideals, and it's the same temper that ends up stabbing him in the brain. He even gave Adolin the nickname Firebrand for his hot-headedness. And Sadeas constantly mentions that he wanted Dalinar to be the man he used to be, the man that would kill a man if he looked at him funny. He even said that the feud between him and Dalinar would never end unless he acted like the man he once was. And in a twisted sort of way, he got that passion and violence that he kept asking for, just from Adolin instead. And the feud between them has now ended. After Sadeas had wiggled his way out of so many conflicts, this scene is a cathartic release for Adolin and the readers. Adolin's arc in this book is a fascinating situation that kind of reminds me of Joel in The Last of Us, where we are happy to see him finally unleash this pent-up anger and emotion, but the action that precedes it is morally ambiguous at best. I've mentioned it 100 times by now, but this is another action that could be constructed as evil for a greater cause. Something horrible in the name of something wonderful. Did Sadeas deserve to die? Yes. Did this action possibly save hundreds of lives in the future? Yes. But is this kind of back-alley murder really justice? I don't know. That's not for me to decide. Dalinar stands atop Urithiru and speaks with the Stormfather. The Stormfather says that the Everstorm is of odium, and it's sweeping through all of Roshar, turning all Parshmen into Voidbringers with red spren. The Stormfather says that he is the spren of storms, a shadow of the Almighty. Once Dalinar learns that the Stormfather who has been talking to him is a spren of the Almighty, he realizes that he can be bonded. Dalinar sees this as a great challenge, so he yells at the Stormfather, "I have been commanded to refound the Knights Radiant. I will need to join their numbers if I am to lead them. Life before death," he shouts. "Strength before weakness. Journey before destination." The Stormfather is not like other spren, but he says that he will not be bound in a way that could kill him, that he is a sliver of the Almighty. But Dalinar is sick and tired of not getting his way, of letting others push him around, so he faces the storm itself. He yells, "I need you, despite what you did. Fortunately, I know the second oath I am to make. I don't need to be told it. I will unite instead of divide, Stormfather. I will bring men together." The thunder silenced. Dalinar stood alone, staring at the sky, waiting. Finally, Stormfather answers. These words are accepted. Dalinar smiles. Dalinar swears the first two oaths of a bondsmith, another order of the Knights Radiant. Bondsmiths are associated with unity. Bringing people together is their highest calling and their most important duty as Radiants. Dalinar's arc in this book is more subdued than the other characters, but this is his biggest character moment of the book. Dalinar finally stops living in regret over Gavilar's death. He wanted to refund the Knights Radiance to stop people like Szeth, but he realizes that he can't beat a force like this alone. He can't unite forcefully. He must bring people together. Not because God told him to, but because he genuinely cares about the state of the world, about its inhabitants. Dalinar goes inside and speaks with his band of Radiants. Shallan mentions that there are 3 now, but is corrected by Renarin. Renarin has bonded to Spren as well, making him a Truth Watcher. Truth Watchers can see visions of the future, which is why Renarin had a massive fit during the Everstorm. Where cryptics deal with personal and internal truths and the lies people tell themselves, Truth Watchers correlate with external truths about the world and society. They are usually associated with deep thinkers, which perfectly suits Renarin. In the epilogue, it's revealed that Jasnah is still alive. She's been in Shadesmar the entire time, causing a disturbance that Wit somehow knows about. The epigraphs at the beginning of each chapter provide some mild foreshadowing and world-building for the Cosmere. Part 1's epigraphs are from Navani's journal. We don't see any scenes from Navani's perspective in this book, so the epigraphs actually give us some pretty deep insight into her grief surrounding Jasnah's supposed death. Part 2's epigraphs are excerpts from the songs of the Parshendi. Each paragraph provides a sentence description on each form that the Parshendi take, and the effect it has on the listener using it. Part 3's epigraphs are excerpts from the in-world book Words of Radiance. They give a ton of information regarding Surgebinders and the different factions of the Knights Radiant. Part 4 details a letter from the dragon Frost addressed to Hoid. Hoid wrote Frost a letter in the Way of Kings epigraphs, and this is his response. Frost gives a ton of exposition about something called Raise. We know from his earlier message that Raise is the person who ascended to become Odium. He says that Odium killed another member of the 16, and that he's caused great suffering. This 16 reference is some deep Cosmere lore, but basically Odium killed Honor, which is why they say Honor is dead. Frost wants Hoid to leave Roshar because of Odium, in essence giving up on the planet and leaving it to Odium's wrath. The last epigraphs are sections from the diagram, Taravangian's Bible of everything that will happen that he wrote on his most brilliant day. Some of the sentences are straightforward and predict something that will happen. Other messages are run-on sentences with no spaces or punctuation, and some of them are just numbers. There is actually a code to this that people have figured out. I'll leave a link to a wiki page that covers it if you're interested. The herald images at the beginning of each chapter are tied to something specific in that chapter. If the herald is mentioned or the surge tied to that herald is used, there will likely be a picture of them on the first page of the chapter. Sometimes it's more obvious, like Nale showing up in several different chapters. Other times it's just Teft using one of their names to curse. The masked figure that shows up in some images is Hoid. This means that he will show up or have an influence on the story. The cover of Words of Radiance features Kaladin on the right and Szeth on the left. Thanks for watching.